When a crime is committed, the perpetrator inevitably leaves behind something, a description, DNA, or physical evidence. This is the criminal's print on the scene. Welcome to the Criminal Prints Podcast, Episode 8.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Criminal Prints Podcast. This is Zach.
And I'm Jaron.
We're glad to have you. Thank you for listening in today. Today, we're going to be talking about the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist from 1990. The Isabella Gardner Museum was built in 1903 in Boston, Massachusetts. The land was purchased by Isabella Stewart Gardner. Isabella and John Jack Lowell Gardner II, her husband, traveled the world collecting art. Her husband, John Jack Lowell, was a merchant for the East Indies Trading Company, and he passed away in 1898. So the land was purchased by Isabella Stewart Gardner, who was an American art collector, philanthropist, and patron of the arts.
In her will, she called for the art collection to be permanently exhibited for the education and enjoyment of the public forever. She hired an architect by the name of Willard T. Sears to build the museum, and construction started in 1896. It finished in 1908, and I think Zach will agree he did a good job. It's a very beautiful building.
I agree completely. He did a wonderful job. It is a very beautiful building. So the day we're going to be talking about all started in the early morning hours on March 18th, 1990. So just after midnight, a red Dodge Daytona, and let me add, I wish I had a Dodge Daytona from the late 60s.
Yeah, not from the mid-'80s like these guys probably had.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. It pulled up by the side entrance of the museum. And as a note, there was a St. Paddy's Day parade nearby. And so there's a gap in the timeline, but we'll get into that. Around 1 a.m., security guard Richard Abath, and let me add in that there's some of this punctuation might not be pronounced correctly, so please bear with us. But security guard Richard Abath returned to his front desk after making his usual rounds, and switched positions with the other guard on shift that morning.
About 20 minutes before the robbery occurred, Richard opened and shut the road door for the museum, which wasn't necessarily protocol. He did this at the same time as when he switched spots with the other guards. Regarding this, he said, "I don't know what the others did, but I was trained to do it that way." Richard also said that if you check the security logs from the other previous nights, it would show he's done this many times before. But it was considered a little unusual because it was needless, and there was some speculation that it possibly was a signal to somebody on the outside.
So at 1:24 a.m., two men that were outside pushed the buzzer near the door and told Richard that they were policemen and that they had heard of a disturbance in the courtyard. So Richard believed that they were police officers because they were wearing police uniforms. And he later said that they did look the part. He said, "I know I wasn't supposed to let strangers into the museum after hours, but no one told me what I was to do if the police showed up saying they were to investigate a disturbance." So, unfortunately, Richard broke protocol and allowed them access through the employee entrance.
And let me add that Richard was not a highly trained security guard. He wasn't an ex-military guy. He wasn't ex-police. He was just a warm body to do the job, more or less. So when they arrived at the main security desk, they being the fake cops, they told Richard that he looked familiar and that there was a default warrant out for his arrest. So this is the method they used to get Richard away from the desk, where the only alarm button for the police could be accessed. He was asked to show his ID to the two fake cops, and they ordered him to face a wall, and they handcuffed him. He thought it was a simple misunderstanding until he realized he wasn't frisked before they put handcuffs on him, which struck him as really weird. And the more strange thing is that one of the so-called policemen had a fake mustache that was made of wax.
Oh boy, that's definitely not a good sign.
No, that's the moment you realize something's not right here.
I wonder what was going through his mind at that minute.
He has a wax mustache.
So just a few minutes later, the second security guard arrived back and was immediately handcuffed. So he asked the two fake policemen why he was being arrested. At this point, they replied that it was a robbery and he wasn't actually being arrested. They took the men down to the basement and handcuffed them to the pipes and wrapped duct tape around their hands, their feet, and their head. So then they went back upstairs where their movements were recorded by motion detectors because the museum had these motion detectors installed.
So as they went back upstairs, their motions were recorded by a motion detection system that the museum had. Remember, this is the 90s. This isn't now. So as far as having security footage, there is none. But what they did do is they had a log sheet. So every time a motion system was tripped, the security would be alerted, you need to go investigate this area. And it logged. So we know, looking back, when and what tripped. So they first went into the Dutch room, and being the probably inexperienced thieves that they are, their method for taking these paintings was to cut them out of the frame. Which, Zach, that probably wouldn't have helped their value right off the bat, right?
That's absolutely horrible.
So the paintings they took in the Dutch room were the Rembrandt Christ in the Storm of the Sea of Galilee and A Lady and Gentleman in Black.
So then they removed Vermeer's The Concert and Flink's Landscape with an Obelisk from their frames. So then they pulled an ancient Chinese bronze gu, or which to me looked like a vase, or breaker from the table, and took a small etched self-portrait by Rembrandt from the side of a chest. As one of them approached the self-portrait etched by Rembrandt, a local alarm sounded, which they immediately smashed.
Which worked because it was a local alarm. It didn't reach out to authorities. It was just a noisemaker.
Exactly. Then in the short room, on the same floor as the Dutch room, 5 drawings by Edgar Degas were taken, along with an eagle fanal. And an eagle fanal is an element marking the top or end of some object, often formed to be a decorative feature. And we know that this eagle fanal sat atop of the Napoleonic flag, which they wanted the complete flag, Napoleon's flag, and they attempted to unscrew it from the wall, but they were unsuccessful.
Yet again, making us think that they probably didn't have a ton of experience in this field. They also stole from the Blue Room Manet's Ches Tortoni. The only footsteps detected in the Blue Room, however, and this is kind of strange, was at 12:27 a.m. and 12:53 a.m., and those are from Richard walking through the Blue Room doing his rounds.
That is very interesting because we know the motion detectors were working that night.
They were working that night, and we know in particular those motion detectors were working at 12:27 and 12:53 when he went through.
That is very strange to me that one of the pieces went missing and there was no record after his rounds.
And he was literally supposed to be there checking on the pieces when it's strange. The frame for the Ches Tortoni painting was found by police on the chair of his boss, actually, at the security desk later. Later, Richard actually was approached by the FBI about this painting, and he said they, quote, wanted to know if I had taken the painting and stashed it somewhere.
And, it's interesting because in the article that he gave, he was very upfront and said, hey, I realize this looks very suspicious. And so he was really cool about it. But I also can understand where the police would be like, hey, what's going on, and why they would ask him that question.
Yeah, you were the only guy in the room, and the painting disappeared from the room. It's definitely strange. He responded, as I've said 100 times before and since, I had absolutely nothing to do with the robberies or the robber.
We know that the thieves made 2 separate trips to their car, the Dodge Daytona, during this time with the stolen artwork. The entire robbery lasted for 81 minutes. I'm sure Jaron would agree that is a long freaking time for a robbery.
Yeah, that's not exactly elegant when you're in a high-scale museum stealing hundreds of millions of dollars of art. 81 minutes, that's an eternity.
That is a very long time. They clearly were not worried in any way of being caught.
No, they definitely weren't. They seem to know that these guards are our only threat, and they're not a threat while they're tied up.
Yeah, because they're taped down in the basement, tied, taped, handcuffed, all the above.
Yep.
So before they left, the thieves actually went down to the basement and told the guards, quote, "You'll be hearing from us in about a year."
So what could that possibly mean?
That is so strange. And clearly, they didn't hear back from them in a year.
No, so it's funny. To this point, what we have is a couple terrible security guards and a couple brutish robbers that go in and steal stuff and attempt to steal stuff and cut paintings out with a knife, and it's just a mess.
One with the wax mustache.
And one wearing a wax mustache, and they're both in fake cop outfits. It's a strange, strange case.
The guards remained tied up and handcuffed and taped in the basement until the police arrived the next morning at 8:15 a.m. That is a long time to be down there.
Yeah, they had a long night tied up. A lot of time to think about what to tell their boss the next morning.
Oh, that would have been misery. So we're going to talk a little bit about the theft specifically. This theft is the single largest property theft in the world. And there were 13 items stolen. The value of these 13 items that were stolen is $500 million.
Yeah, as in $500 million.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, in fact, there's currently a reward an active reward for $10 million for information leading directly to recovery of all 13 works, which most likely at this point, getting all 13 this many years later would be tough.
And they add a caveat that they'd have to be in good condition.
There's also a separate $100,000 reward for the fanal that was on the Napoleonic flag.
As an interesting note, there are empty frames that remain hanging in the museum even to this day, and they're placeholders for the missing works, and they're a symbol of hope that one day the missing items will be returned.
Yeah, the museum isn't shy about the robbery. If you get on their website, they even talk about the robbery. And it's just they just embrace it as part of their history, and they hope that they get them back someday. And it's very interesting to see them embrace that and talk about that. So let's talk a little bit about the investigation. So early in the investigation, the FBI took control of the case, and the grounds for that were that they believed that the art will cross state lines, and that was likely, so that's how they got involved.
The investigators also believed, as we've talked about a little bit, that the thieves didn't know too much specifically about the art. For example, the most expensive piece in the museum, which is Titan's The Rape of Europa, was not stolen. And this is a very well-known piece of art.
It really is. In fact, you would know it if you've seen it. It's very well known.
And very distinct. Several of the other paintings were passed by on their way. And these are also very expensive, valuable paintings that were passed by. But on the way to stealing the fanal, they passed by these paintings. We know that, as we mentioned before too, that they were unable to unscrew the Napoleonic flag from the wall. At least I'll get your take on it also, Jaron, but to me this points as amateurs.
Yeah, they just sound like bumbling idiots. In fact, the FBI's lead agent, Jeffrey J. Kelly, said that he finds it difficult to understand why this assortment of items was stolen despite the thieves being in a museum long enough to take whatever they wished.
Yeah, they were certainly not on a time crunch by any means.
So again, they didn't seem to really have a grasp of what the art was, what each thing was worth, and how to take it all effectively without severely damaging it.
Another reason that law enforcement doesn't believe that these two thieves were experts is due to the fact that they cut some of the paintings from their frames and smashed frames for two other sketches.
The FBI believes that the thieves were members of a criminal organization based in the Mid-Atlantic and New England, and they believe the stolen paintings were moved throughout Connecticut and the Philadelphia area in the years following the theft. Specifically, they believe that some of these stolen paintings, including the Storm of the Sea of Galilee, was offered for sale in Philadelphia in the early 2000s, but unfortunately they don't know how the attempted sale went, so there's not a lot of knowledge to be had there.
This is very interesting to me because that's the early 2000s. These were stolen in 1990. It seems like they just held on to them until some of the heat died off.
Yeah, so the first rumor kind of popping up of a sale is a decade later. That's a long time. That's to commit a crime like this, you have to be very forward thinking, and you might not be able to unload that art really quickly, and it just doesn't seem like these brutish thieves were all that forward thinking.
So in 2013, the FBI said that they believe they actually know the identity of the two thieves, but they didn't give any names. And they came back in 2015 and said that they believe that those thieves are now deceased.
Interestingly, even if the thieves are still alive, they can't face charges because there's a statute of limitations and it has expired. So, good job, I guess, guys. You got away with it.
If they're still alive. Who knows
if you're still alive, yeah.
So, in 2010, the FBI sent in crime scene evidence, which we know they had plenty of it, to their laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, to get retested in hopes of obtaining a DNA profile. Unfortunately, in 2017, it was reported that they lost the handcuffs and duct tape that was used to secure the guards in the basement. Oh my.
So adding to the fake cops that were total clowns, the real cops, they thought, let's see what we can do to make ourselves look bad too.
Oh, what an awful mistake. Literally losing the evidence. And, for example, the duct tape. That is prime evidence to get a DNA profile from.
Yeah, you really couldn't ask for much better evidence than that.
Oh, it'd be perfect.
Just not something you want to lose.
Oopsie.
In 1997, the Boston Herald, they had a reporter named Tom Mashberg. He was driven to a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, by William Youngsworth. William was an associate of New England art thief Miles Connor Jr., and he was given a flashlight to look at a painting he was told was the Storm on the Sea of Galilee. They also gave him paint chips to verify the authenticity. The paint chips were tested and confirmed to be Dutch, 17th century origin, but they said they were not from the stolen painting. The FBI stopped dealing with Youngsworth at this point and couldn't say for sure if it was real or fake.
Ironically, that specific painting has since gone missing. August 6, 2015, the FBI released a video that had a lot of people talking. It was the night before the theft, and it appears to show two men on the tape, and they know for sure one was Richard Abath, the security guard. And the video shows Richard buzzing a man into the museum twice within a few minutes. The other individual stayed that he buzzed in for around 3 minutes and then returned to his car and left. So Jaron, let me ask you, I know it's been said on or off occasionally, but could Richard possibly been a collaborator?
Well, it's definitely possible, and stuff like that would make you think that he could have been. That's, that in addition to one of the pieces disappearing without the motion detectors going off.
Something else that really caught my attention was just days before Richard had given notice that he was leaving the museum. So according to the WBUR podcast, Last Seen, the video footage is Richard letting in his boss at night. They kind of said it was a red herring. We do know that this goes against their security protocol of no one being let in after hours.
But unfortunately, their security protocol didn't seem to mean much.
It didn't go as planned, that's for sure.
In December of 2015, FBI agents searched East Boston's Suffolk Downs horse track. There had been rumors for a long time that some of the stolen artwork was there. They found a couple safes. They drilled them open, but they didn't find any paintings.
So now let's talk a little bit about suspects specifically. Boston gangster Bobby Donati had been rumored to be involved in the heist. And we talked about Miles Connor Jr. earlier, who was a New England art thief. And he said that he and Bobby eyed the museum in the 1980s. And shortly before the robbery, Donati was seen at a nightclub with a sack of police uniforms.
Which obviously is very fitting with this case because these couple clowns wore police uniforms. Bobby also worked for crime boss Vincent Ferreira, who visited Bobby in jail in the early 90s. When Ferreira asked about the robbery, Bobby said he buried it.
I'm just going to add here that this, in my opinion, makes no sense, because if he buried it, why would it have been for sale years later, and how would they have protected it in that process?
Yeah, but Bobby went ahead and took those secrets to the grave with him because on September 24th, 1991, he was beaten and stabbed to death.
So federal authorities said that they will not charge anyone who voluntarily turns in the artwork. But anyone caught knowingly in possession of the stolen items can be prosecuted. So, Jaron, to me, the FBI is saying, hey, just return it.
Yeah.
Please return these stolen items. We want them back.
Yeah, and that would make you think, they got nothing. They're pretty much at a loss. When you're just saying, hey, give it back and we'll look the other way, you got nothing.
So now we're going to talk about Robert Gentile. And at least in my opinion, when I was doing my research, his name was kind of the biggest red flag to me.
Yeah, he seems like a solid suspect.
So Robert Gentile was a gangster in Hartford, Connecticut. And in May of 2012, they actually searched his home in Manchester, Connecticut. Now, they didn't find any of the stolen items, but what they did find is extremely intriguing. In his basement, they found a sheet of paper listing what each stolen item's value was on the black market.
And that seems a little damning, doesn't it?
That does. Why would he have that in his basement?
Yeah, if you don't have any involvement at all, you wouldn't think that'd be something you'd find. And I mean, you wouldn't find that in my basement if you were to look.
You or me either. I second that. So Robert Gentile claims that he got this list from an associate in Massachusetts, and it was part of a fake scheme. He said that what he was trying to do is capitalize on the publicity surrounding the heist and make a little money.
He actually even took a lie detector test to prove his innocence. Unfortunately for him, the test concluded there was a 99.9% chance he was lying.
Oh, holy cow. He crushed it, but not in a good way.
No, that did not go how he thought it would go, and you just got to think, why would he have taken that lie detector test?
And, as we've talked about before on the podcast, we absolutely realize that lie detector tests are not foolproof. They're not all that reliable, but 99.9% chance he was lying?
It's definitely not a good look.
Ouch, Robert. So, on January 2016, clearly the FBI had their attention focused squarely on him, and he was actually convicted of an unrelated gun charge, and the FBI was hoping to force him to reveal the locations of the missing items.
Yeah, so that was really just a little gun charge to try to push it into fessing up, because they felt very confident this guy knows something.
During a hearing, a federal prosecutor revealed significant evidence tying Robert to the crime. The prosecutor said that Robert and a mob partner, also by the name of Robert, the mob partner's name is Robert Guarantee, attempted to use the return of 2 stolen items to reduce a prison sentence of an associate.
Nothing like admitting you know where they're at.
Oh my.
This other Robert's wife told investigators in 2015 that her husband once had possession of some of the art, but that he gave the paintings back to Robert Gentile before he died of cancer in 2004. We'll go back to Robert Gentile. When he was in jail, he actually told at least 3 people that he had knowledge of the stolen art.
The FBI gets up in arms again, and on May 2nd, 2016, they search his house again. Now, I couldn't find exactly what they find, but to me, that means they didn't find anything.
Given that it's been over 3 years, I think it's safe to say they didn't find anything of consequence. He actually just recently got out of prison in March 2019 due to good behavior after serving 35 months of his sentence.
So Robert Gentile continues to publicly deny any involvement in the case, and I think this is the key when questioned by authorities.
Yeah, because he seems very open to bragging to people about, yeah, I know this about it, I know that about it. But when the cops are involved, he doesn't know anything.
Very intriguing.
So go over just a couple little theories if we can put a couple together. Zach, what do you think?
My personal opinion is the mob certainly had part to do with it, and I think that there are individuals that know a lot more than they lead on to. For example, Robert Gentile. I think that he knew at least at one point where the paintings were, or at least part of the items that were stolen.
Yeah, and it is possible. It certainly seems that the mob had something to do with it. It's possible that it wasn't directed by the mob itself, but members of the mob just have their fingerprints all over this. Even suspects that may or may not have done it. Everybody has mob affiliation in this case.
Now, having said that, they could have probably hired 2 people that knew a little more about the artwork and frankly could have done a much better job at taking more valuable art.
You would certainly think that they would have planned a little better than they did, but maybe they didn't want to use anybody too useful for this case. I don't know what the situation was, but it created a very interesting robbery.
It certainly did.
So if anybody has any information, you should contact the director of security at the museum. He goes by Anthony Amore, and their phone number is 617-278-5114, or you can email them at theft@gardnermuseum.org.
And how we talked about earlier, how there's empty frames up. I think this is really cool, and I personally would love to see these items returned to the museum. And of course, it baffles me too because there's a $10 million reward for the return of these. I would sure think if somebody had information, they would say, hey, I want 10 mil. I'm going to do my best to get this $10 million.
And it is possible that they're just not even together anymore. For example, the other Robert's wife saying, yeah, he had a couple of them, he returned them. It makes me believe that you couldn't just get all 13 in one foul swoop.
So that is episode 8, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum Heist. We hope everybody enjoyed the episode. We want to personally thank everybody for listening to the podcast. It means a lot to us. Please check out our Twitter and our Facebook. If you have any suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. And everybody have an absolutely fantastic day.